Imagine finding out you're the last to know when your own kid gets rushed to the hospital. My wife called 8 people, 8, before she thought to call me. My wife, 33F, and I, 30 Matter, have had some issues in our marriage, and I've reached the point of feeling like enough is enough. We've been married for 7 years, and our son is 3 years old. When my wife learned she was pregnant, she decided to wait to tell me so she could surprise me. By the time she told me, she had told her friends and family. Her family took me finding out after everyone else as her being afraid to tell me and called me on it. She did not defend me, but claims she did when I was out of the room. Later in her pregnancy, when we talked baby names, she mentioned that she no longer wanted to use the original name we had agreed on because her sister didn't like the name. She had told me we were not discussing names with anyone, so I asked why she told her sister, and she said she wanted some opinions. I told her we liked it. Then I asked if she didn't anymore, and she said she still did, but she wanted her sister to like the name. Then she said her sister's opinion was too important, and I asked her if her sister's opinion was more important than mine. She said no. But then she tried to push for a name her sister loved that my wife knew I hated. It left me feeling less important again. I know she was the one carrying our son, she was going through all the changes in her body, etc. But it made me sad that not only did she tell her friends and family she was pregnant first, but then wanted her sister's opinion more than mine, it felt like. When our son was 18 months old, he was taken to hospital. My wife was home with him, and I was working from the office that day. My wife called her family before she called me, and when I got to the hospital, her parents were pissed at me for not being there sooner. And then they said I'm clearly very uninvolved when my wife called them first. I admit I was more angry this time than sad, and I told my wife she called 8 other people before me, our son's father. We talked about it some, but our son was the focus. My wife and I decided before that we wouldn't sign our son up for football unless he asked us to, and he was older and was safe. We both agreed that the injuries sustained in football is a concern. All those brain injuries. It was something we were on the same page about. But a couple of weeks ago, she told me she had put his name down to start in another year. She did this without saying anything, because her parents believe it's important that boys play football. This brought the hospital incident back more than anything, and I told her it feels like she'd prefer being a single mom since it seems so easy to cut me out or dismiss my opinion. She told me I was being unfair, and she said I sounded ready to divorce her, which was crazy. I didn't deny it, and she told me I can't ruin our family over small disagreements. I reminded her she called 8 people when our son was taken to the hospital before me. Aida? Update 1. After I posted, I sat down to really think about everything. Like, was I overreacting, or was this just years of small stuff adding up? I decided I needed to talk to my wife about all of it again, but this time I wanted to make sure she really understood how I felt, because honestly, I wasn't even sure she fully realized how serious this had gotten for me. So, I waited until our son was asleep and asked her if we could talk. She gave me that look, you know, the one like, here we go again. But she sat down anyway. I started by telling her this wasn't about attacking her or blaming her for everything. I just needed to explain how all these moments had added up over the years and made me feel like an outsider in my own family. I brought up the pregnancy announcement first. I told her that finding out last after her friends and family already knew made me feel like I wasn't even part of the decision. Her response? Well, I thought you'd be happy to find out in a special way. I told her it wasn't about how I found out, it was about when. She said she didn't understand why I was still hung up on that after all this time. So, I moved on. I brought up the baby name thing, and how it felt like her sister's opinion mattered more than mine. She rolled her eyes and said, "That was 3 years ago. Why are you still bringing this up?" I told her it's not just about the baby name, it's about the pattern of me being the last one to matter in decisions that affect our family. She didn't really say anything to that, just looked at her phone like she was over the conversation already. When I brought up the hospital incident, I thought for sure she'd see my side. I mean, our son was in the hospital, and she called 8 people before me. How could she not get why that hurt? But nope. She said, "I wasn't thinking about it like that. I was panicking and wanted my parents there. I figured you'd come as soon as you could anyway." I asked why she didn't think to call me first since I'm his dad, and she said, "Because you were at work, and I didn't want to bother you if it wasn't serious yet." That one stung because, how is your kid going to the hospital not serious? Then I brought up the football thing, and that's when things really went off the rails. I told her I couldn't believe she'd sign him up for something we both agreed we wouldn't do without even talking to me. She said, "It's not like he's starting tomorrow. I just put his name down in case he wants to do it later." I reminded her that we agreed we'd wait until he was older and asked us himself. Her response? "Well, he's going to want to do it. Every kid wants to play sports with their friends, and I don't want him to feel left out." At this point, I was frustrated, but I was trying to keep calm. I told her that it wasn't just about football, it was about making decisions together and me feeling like I don't even have a say in my own son's life. She said, "You're being so dramatic. It's not like I'm cutting you out. I just don't think you need to be involved in every little thing." That's when I lost it. I told her, "This isn't about little things. This is about you not respecting me as a parent or a partner. You're acting like my opinion doesn't matter, and honestly, it's starting to feel like you'd rather do this alone." She looked shocked, like I'd just slapped her or something. Then she said, "You're seriously talking about divorce over this? Do you even hear yourself? You're going to ruin our family because you're upset about small disagreements?" I told her it wasn't small to me, and if she couldn't see why, then maybe we did have a bigger problem than I thought. That's when she dropped a bomb on me. She said, "Fine. If you're so unhappy, maybe you should leave. But don't expect me to fight for someone who's willing to give up on their family so easily." That shut me up. I didn't know what to say. I just sat there while she got up and went to bed. The next day, she acted like nothing happened. She was talking to me about what we should make for dinner and asking if I could pick up some groceries on my way home from work, like everything was fine. But it wasn't fine for me. I couldn't stop thinking about what she said. "Don't expect me to fight for you." What does that even mean? Is she saying she wouldn't care if I left? Or is she trying to guilt me into staying? I decided to text her while I was at work and say we needed to figure this out because I couldn't keep living like this. She didn't respond for hours, and when she finally did, all she said was, "We'll talk later." When I got home, she sat me down and said, "I don't know what you want from me. I've apologized for the things that upset you, but you keep holding on to them like you're trying to build a case against me. If you can't let it go, maybe we need to think about what's really best for our son." That caught me off guard because it sounded like she was suggesting divorce too. And I asked her if she was serious about that, and she said, "I don't want to get divorced, but I also don't want to be in a marriage where I'm constantly walking on eggshells because you're upset about things I didn't even realize were a big deal." I told her they were a big deal to me, and if she cared, she'd at least try to understand why. She said, "I'm tired of always being the bad guy. Maybe you should look in the mirror and ask yourself why you're so hard to work with." So now I'm stuck. On one hand, I feel like she's gaslighting me into thinking I'm the problem. On the other hand, maybe I am the problem. Maybe I'm too sensitive, or I'm holding on to stuff I should have let go of a long time ago. But if that's true, why do I still feel so unheard? I don't know what to do. Couples therapy seems like the obvious answer, but I'm not even sure she'd take it seriously. And honestly, I'm starting to wonder if it's worth the effort if she doesn't see a problem with how things have been. Update 2. After the last conversation with my wife, things got tense. Not in a shouting kind of way, but the silence felt heavier, like we were both just waiting for something to happen. I decided to take some space to think, not in a dramatic "I'm leaving" way, but just taking some time to myself. I started journaling, which sounds weird because I've never done that before, but it helped me put everything in order. The one thing I couldn't shake was her saying, "Don't expect me to fight for you." It felt like she was already checked out, or at least ready to be. So I started asking myself the hard questions. If she didn't fight for me, would I fight for her? Could we even fix this? I knew I needed clarity. That night, after our son went to bed, I told her we needed to talk again. She sighed, clearly annoyed, but she sat down. I said I wanted to focus on solutions because just arguing about what went wrong wasn't helping. I suggested couples therapy again. She said, "If you need therapy to figure out your feelings, go for it, but I don't think we need it. We just need to communicate better." That felt like a slap in the face. I told her therapy is communicating better, and it's a neutral space where we can actually talk without one of us shutting down or walking away. She said, "Fine, let's try it. But if this turns into you blaming me for everything, I'm done." I told her it wasn't about blame. It was about figuring out why we're stuck in this pattern. We went to our first session the following week. Honestly, it didn't start great. The therapist asked us to talk about why we were there, and before I could even explain, my wife said, "He's just upset I don't agree with him on everything." I felt like that set the tone for the whole session. I tried to explain my side calmly, but every time I mentioned feeling left out or dismissed, she'd roll her eyes or cut in with, "That's not what happened." The therapist had to step in a couple of times and remind her to let me finish. After the session, I asked her how she felt about it. She said, "It was fine, but I don't think we're going to get anywhere if you keep dragging up the past." I told her it's not just about the past. It's about the pattern and how it keeps happening. She said, "I don't even think there's a pattern. You're just making everything a bigger deal than it needs to be." The next day, something strange happened. I was cleaning up after dinner while she was giving our son a bath. Her phone buzzed on the counter, and a message popped up. I wasn't snooping, but the preview was right there, and it was from her sister. It said, "You didn't tell him yet? You need to just rip off the Band-Aid." That stopped me in my tracks. Tell me what? I didn't bring it up right away because I wanted to see if she'd say anything herself. She didn't. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing with possibilities. Was she hiding something about us? About our son? About her family? I decided to wait until the next day to ask because I didn't want to come at her when we were both tired. The next morning, while our son was watching cartoons, I brought it up. I said, "Hey, I saw that your sister texted you something about not telling me yet. What's that about?" Her face froze for a second, and then she laughed like I was being ridiculous. She said, "Oh, that? It's nothing. She's just being dramatic about something stupid." I asked her what the something stupid was. She shrugged and said, "She's annoyed I haven't told you I'm thinking about going back to work." That didn't sit right with me. First of all, why would her sister care so much about her going back to work? And second, why wouldn't she just tell me that outright? I said, "Why wouldn't you just tell me you're thinking about going back to work? That's not a big deal." She got defensive and said, "Because I knew you'd turn it into one." I let it go for the moment because our son was there, but the whole thing didn't add up. That night, after he went to bed, I brought it up again. I told her it felt like there was more to the story, and I needed her to be honest with me. She snapped and said, "Why do you always think I'm hiding something? I told you it's about work. If you don't believe me, that's on you." I let it drop again, but I started paying closer attention. Over the next week, she was acting weird, like distracted and jumpy whenever her phone went off. One night, while she was in the shower, I did something I'm not proud of. I looked at her phone. There were more texts from her sister, and they weren't about work. Her sister had been asking her why she hadn't told me about something involving her parents. I couldn't see the whole conversation because some of the messages were deleted, but the ones that were left made it clear this was about more than just her going back to work. I decided I wasn't going to confront her until I had all the facts. So, I reached out to her sister. I know that might seem extreme, but I felt like I was being left in the dark about something important. I texted her and said, "Hey, I think there's something going on that wife hasn't told me. Can you help me out here?" Her sister called me almost immediately. She sounded nervous and said, "Look, I don't want to get in the middle of this, but you deserve to know the truth." My stomach dropped. I asked her what she meant, and she said, "Mom and Dad have been pressuring her to move closer to them. They even offered to help her buy a house if she divorces you and moves back home with your son." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I asked her if my wife was seriously considering it, and she said, "She hasn't decided yet, but she's been talking about how unhappy she is and how it might be better for everyone if she just starts over." I hung up and just sat there for what felt like hours, trying to process everything. When my wife came home, I didn't say anything. I'm still trying to figure out what to do.